You can't block community access to essential infrastructure. This isn't community infrastructure. Lady, it's my private property. And you've been trespassing for 30 years. I never thought I'd be standing in my own driveway watching someone demand $8,500 for violations on land they don't even own. But there I was. I'm Michael Bradford, retired transportation engineer. And this is the story of how one entitled HOA president thought she could bully me into compliance while her entire office building sat illegally on my private land. Claire Morrison moved into Riverside Meadows 3 years ago and had the audacity to treat my 7,500 square feet like her personal kingdom, all to fund a consulting business built on embezzlement and fraud. She was about to learn an expensive lesson about property rights, and I was her teacher. My first encounter with Claire seemed almost routine for someone who dealt with government bureaucracy for 20 years. It was Saturday morning, January 4th, 2026, and I was reviewing city planning documents on my laptop, a habit left over from 2 decades managing infrastructure projects for Colorado's Department of Transportation. The coffee was still steaming, steam curling up past my reading glasses, when I heard car doors slam with that particular aggressive confidence that suggested official business rather than friendly neighbors. Through my front window, I watched a woman in a navy business suit approach, flanked by what appeared to be a uniformed officer and 2 others carrying official folders with the kind of self-importance that screamed amateur authority. The doorbell rang twice, sharp and impatient, before I could even set down my mug and walk the 15 feet from my kitchen table to the front door. The woman stepped forward the moment I opened it, her blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour. Her smile, all practiced business. Mr. Bradford, I'm Claire Morrison, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. This is Officer Davis from Code Enforcement, Tom Bradley, our treasurer, and Janet Walsh, our secretary. Her gesture encompassed the 3 people behind her with the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed. But something felt immediately off about the whole presentation. Officer Davis's badge looked wrong. The county seal appeared faded compared to the crisp lettering above it, like someone had printed it on a home laser printer and laminated it at an office supply store. The uniformed shirt fit poorly around the shoulders, and his posture lacked the casual confidence of actual law enforcement officers I'd worked with for decades. Claire unfolded what appeared to be an official document with city letterhead, her movements deliberately theatrical, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. You have 24 hours to address these critical zoning violations, she announced, though her eyes flickered briefly to Officer Davis before continuing, seeking approval or reinforcement. I wasn't sure which. First, she said, ticking off items on her manicured fingers. Remove that vegetable garden immediately. Agricultural use is prohibited in residential zones, according to Municipal Code 7-3-12. Second, repaint your entire house according to our approved color palette standards. Your current shade violates community aesthetic requirements. Third, remove that privacy fence along the western property line. It blocks necessary sightlines for community safety monitoring. She handed me a detailed estimate sheet, pausing for dramatic effect before tapping the bottom line with one perfectly painted fingernail. Total cost for full compliance. Her finger tapped the paper twice for emphasis. $8,500. The number hung in the air like smoke. Tom Bradley and Janet Walsh nodded in synchronized approval behind her, their clipboards ready to document my reaction. Officer Davis shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding direct contact as Claire clearly savored what she expected to be my shock and compliance. But my 20 years of reviewing municipal documents and infrastructure permits had trained my eye for inconsistencies. The document formatting seemed off. The margins were wrong. Statute numbers didn't match the familiar county standards I'd memorized during decades of transportation project approvals. And that signature at the bottom looked suspiciously fresh, like wet ink, rather than the aged documentation it claimed to represent. For the first time in my career dealing with actual government authority, I found myself wondering if I was looking at incompetence or something much darker. Officer Davis, I said carefully, focusing on the uniformed man whose badge continued to bother me like a splinter I couldn't quite locate. Can you explain the specific zoning statutes cited in this document? Which municipal code section authorizes agricultural prohibition in residential zones? His discomfort was immediate and telling. The kind of physical reaction you can't fake when someone asks questions you haven't prepared for. I'm just here to deliver the official paperwork. Sir. He tugged at his collar. The specific details are all documented in the notice itself. You'll need to address compliance through proper channels. Claire's confident demeanor wavered slightly as I continued examining the document with professional scrutiny she clearly hadn't expected. The letterhead was expertly forged. I'd give them that much. But the municipal seal was pixelated when I held it at the right angle. Clearly printed on standard paper, rather than properly embossed the way real government documents always were. This is quite comprehensive, I said carefully, folding the papers while noting how Officer Davis had started backing toward their vehicles like he couldn't wait to escape. I'll need to verify these requirements with the city planning office on Monday. Cross-reference these statute citations with actual municipal code. Standard due diligence. The group exchanged glances that confirmed my growing suspicions. Claire's practiced smile returned, but it felt forced now, like she was holding it in place through pure will. Of course, Mr. Bradford, due diligence is always wise for property owners. We'll return Monday afternoon for your compliance confirmation and payment arrangement. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long moment, staring at the fraudulent document and wondering what I'd just witnessed. Was this elaborate intimidation, sophisticated scam, or had Claire genuinely believed the document was legitimate? Fed false information by whoever had created it. The doubt gnawed at me. Because what if I was wrong? What if this was all some massive misunderstanding? Some administrative error that had cascaded into this theatrical presentation. What if Officer Davis was a legitimate code enforcement officer having a bad day, and the pixelated seal was just poor quality printing from an overworked municipal office? I'd spent 20 years building my reputation on careful analysis and measured responses. Jumping to conclusions about fraud could make me look paranoid. Could damage relationships with neighbors who might be innocent victims of bad information themselves. Could turn a simple administrative correction into a hostile confrontation that would poison community relations for years. But then I remembered the way Davis had avoided eye contact. The way Claire's smile had faltered when I asked for verification. The synchronized nodding from Bradley and Walsh like they'd rehearsed this performance. I called the city planning department. The weekend clerk's response was swift and definitive. No violations existed against my property. No complaints had been filed. The document was completely fraudulent. And Officer Davis wasn't scheduled for weekend duty. His badge number didn't match any current enforcement personnel in the county system. Claire Morrison had just attempted sophisticated fraud against me. With fake documentation, a borrowed or forged uniform, and what appeared to be willing accomplices who understood exactly what they were doing, the realization hit like cold water. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't administrative error. This was deliberate, calculated, systematic fraud designed to extract $8,500 through intimidation and fake legal authority. And I had absolutely no idea yet how deep this actually went. Monday morning brought genuine code enforcement to my door, which told me Claire's network extended further than I'd realized. Inspector Williams stood on my porch with legitimate credentials, proper uniform, and official documentation that I recognized immediately as authentic after decades of working with actual government officials. Mr. Bradford, I'm Inspector Williams. We received an anonymous complaint about an unpermitted structure on your property. He gestured toward my garden shed, built 3 years ago with proper permits that I'd filed myself, paid for myself, and received final inspection approval for myself. 20 minutes later, he attached a red tag to my front door. Permit verification required within 10 business days pending administrative review. The bureaucratic machinery Claire had set in motion was grinding forward, creating maximum inconvenience through perfectly legal administrative procedures that would cost me time and money to resolve, even though I'd done everything correctly. Tuesday brought property destruction. A 3-man landscaping crew appeared along my property line at 7:30 in the morning. Their truck emblazoned with Riverside Meadows Professional Services. Within minutes, they destroyed 15 feet of my mature privacy hedge that had taken 6 years to grow to its current height. When I confronted them, the supervisor remained confident rather than apologetic. HOA work order specified, trimming overgrown vegetation, blocking community sightlines for safety monitoring. Your hedge exceeded maximum height restrictions per community standards. He handed me a business card. Any questions should go through our main office. $300 in mature plantings destroyed. But the psychological message was worth far more to Claire. You're not safe. We can reach your property anytime. Resistance will cost you more than compliance. Wednesday escalated through coordinated legal and social pressure that demonstrated Claire's sophisticated understanding of how to weaponize systems against individuals. A process server appeared at my former workplace during lunch, creating deliberate embarrassment as he delivered papers in full view of colleagues I'd worked with for years. The documents revealed an attempted lien filing for $2,400 in alleged unpaid HOA fees. My title monitoring service had flagged it before official recording, but the damage to my reputation had already occurred. Former colleagues now looked at me differently, wondering if the quiet, retired engineer they'd respected had somehow become a difficult neighbor who didn't pay his obligations. Simultaneously, my mailbox overflowed with certified letters. Escalating legal threats, administrative demands. Community social media posts from anonymous accounts describing me as the difficult neighbor who threatened everyone's property values with his refusal to cooperate with reasonable community standards. Thursday brought surveillance disguised as community concern. Claire herself walked past my house 3 separate times throughout the day, each pass slower and more deliberate, her clipboard documenting violations, real or imagined. Another board member positioned himself across the street, photographing my property with telephoto precision while consulting official-looking paperwork. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor I'd helped with groceries just last winter, approached with genuine worry rather than hostility. Mr. Bradford, Claire says there are serious safety concerns about your property maintenance. She showed us photographs of alleged code violations at last night's emergency board meeting. She looked genuinely distressed. "Is everything all right? Have you been having financial difficulties?" The systematic isolation was working exactly as Claire had designed. Parents began steering children away from my yard. Whispering instructions about avoiding the problem house. Former friendly neighbors crossed the street rather than wave. My reputation in a community I'd lived in peacefully for 6 years was being systematically destroyed through rumor, innuendo, and manufactured crisis. And here's what really gnawed at me during those nights when I couldn't sleep. What if I fought back and was wrong? What if Claire genuinely believed she had authority? What if I destroyed her reputation, cost her relationships, damaged her livelihood? And it turned out she'd been operating on bad information rather than malicious intent. 20 years of professional experience had taught me that administrative errors happened constantly, that good people made mistakes, that systems failed in ways that looked like conspiracy but were actually just bureaucratic incompetence. What if this entire situation was just Claire taking her volunteer HOA position too seriously, getting bad legal advice, and trying to do what she genuinely believed was right for the community? The doubt kept me paralyzed, kept me defensive rather than offensive, kept me reacting to her moves instead of making my own, until Friday, when everything changed. Friday brought the emergency injunction that transformed doubt into certainty and defensive confusion into focused rage. The document arrived via process server, claiming my property presented immediate public safety hazards requiring urgent court intervention. The supporting evidence included a hastily arranged inspection from a private safety consultant whose report cited structural concerns and access violations that were pure fiction. But it was the allegations about blocked emergency access routes and environmental contamination threatening community health that crossed the line from aggressive HOA enforcement into something I finally recognized as calculated fraud, designed to generate legal fees and consulting income for Claire's private business. The timeline was worse. 10 days to prepare a defense for what amounted to a legal ambush designed to seize control through judicial emergency powers. Claire wasn't just being aggressive, she was being predatory, systematic, criminal. That's when this stopped being about defending myself. That's when it became about exposing her. I hired professional surveyor Mike Anderson, a former colleague from my transportation department days. His comprehensive analysis would map every utility line, a structure, an access road with GPS precision that could withstand legal scrutiny. What we found over the next 3 days would transform my defensive response into something Claire Morrison never saw coming. The GPS measurements revealed something staggering. Something that explained why Claire had been so aggressive about establishing her authority over my property. Something that turned her from powerful aggressor into terrified fraudster trying to protect a secret that had existed for 30 years. The HOA office building sat 75% on my property. The community playground existed entirely within my boundaries. Storm drainage systems, electrical easements, even the parking lot, all constructed on my land without legal authority, without easements, without compensation. $750,000 in unpermitted infrastructure, built illegally, operated illegally for 3 decades. Claire hadn't been trying to bully me into compliance. She'd been trying to establish precedent that I accepted her authority over property she knew damn well was mine. Because if I accepted her citations, paid her fines, acknowledged her jurisdiction, It would create legal presumption that I recognized HOA authority over land they'd been stealing from me for 30 years. This wasn't about $8,500 in fake violations. This was about $750,000 in infrastructure fraud that Claire had either discovered and was desperately covering up, or had known about from the beginning and was protecting through aggressive intimidation. For the first time since this nightmare started, I wasn't the one being investigated. Claire was, and she had absolutely no idea yet that I knew. The evidence kept mounting. County records showed no filed easements for any community facilities, no construction permits for shared amenities, environmental violations where septic connections fed into storm drains, violating federal EPA regulations that carried criminal penalties. These massive violations had remained hidden for decades because county GIS mapping contained errors showing facilities on HOA land rather than private property. When Claire's consulting firm took over management 3 years ago, she'd either never investigated actual boundaries or had deliberately concealed violations to maintain her profitable management contract. My forensic accounting investigation revealed the true scope of Claire's criminal enterprise. HOA debt to Greenleaf Property Management totaled $45,000 in unpaid fees. Forensic analysis uncovered $35,000 missing from HOA reserve funds with no documentation. Claire's consulting fees over 3 years totaled $75,000. She'd been embezzling from the community while bullying residents into paying fake citations and inflated fees, using her position as HOA president to fund a consulting business built entirely on theft and fraud. But here's what kept me awake those nights. The same question that had paralyzed me from the beginning: what about the innocent residents, the families who'd bought homes believing infrastructure was legal, the neighbors who had nothing to do with Claire's fraud but would suffer when truth emerged? Exposing Claire meant potentially destroying property values for 80 families, meant creating financial chaos for people who'd done nothing wrong except trust their HOA president, meant I'd be the villain in their story even though I was the victim in mine. The weight of that decision, the knowledge that truth and justice would hurt innocent people, made my evidence binder feel like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Because being right isn't the same as being kind. And sometimes the person who exposes fraud does more immediate damage than the person who committed it. But I thought about Mrs. Patterson's worried face, about parents teaching children to fear the problem neighbor, about my destroyed reputation and demolished hedge and fraudulent liens, about Claire's systematic theft from families who trusted her. Truth might hurt, but Claire's lies were already destroying people, just more slowly, more quietly, more permanently. Monday morning, I wired $25,000 to Greenleaf Property Management and purchased the HOA's outstanding debt, $45,000 in obligations, secured by community assets including the office building and common facilities. I now owned Claire's unpaid bills, which meant I controlled the HOA's future. And Claire had absolutely no idea her victim had just become her creditor. My counterattack launched simultaneously across multiple fronts. Federal EPA complaint documenting septic violations. County building authorities receiving evidence of unpermitted construction. Civil lawsuit against Claire and the HOA alleging harassment. Fraud. Trespass. And conversion with damages exceeding $1 million. Each filing strategically coordinated to create overwhelming legal pressure while establishing my authority through official government recognition of her violations. Claire's response revealed someone who'd moved from helping her community to believing they deserved to be afraid of her authority to recognizing her entire empire was collapsing but still fighting desperately to maintain control. Emergency board powers let her impose $3,000 special assessments per household for legal defense. Lien acceleration notices demanding immediate payment from all residents. Carefully staged media interviews portraying herself as the competent leader protecting community interests against my vindictive litigation. She was betting that volume of paperwork and social pressure would exhaust me before truth could emerge. That community fear would protect her from individual exposure. That her sophisticated legal knowledge would outmaneuver my engineering background. She'd forgotten that engineers build things that last, including cases against criminals who underestimate them. The community pressure reached breaking point. Tom Bradley resigned in protest. Janet Walsh began questioning legal strategies that seemed designed to escalate rather than resolve. Residents faced mounting financial obligations while property values tanked under uncertainty about legal infrastructure. Friday's emergency hearing at the county building would resolve everything. Commissioner Patricia Huang would hear evidence from both sides and make decisions that would determine the fate of our entire community. Claire arrived with 3 attorneys and boxes of files. She still believed she could win through legal maneuvering. She didn't know I'd spent Thursday night preparing the one piece of evidence that would end her completely. The hearing room filled beyond capacity. 80 residents. 3 television crews. County officials. Legal teams. The largest crowd ever assembled for a property rights hearing in county history. Commissioner Huang called order with judicial formality. Miss Morrison, you filed the emergency petition. Present your case. Claire rose with practiced grace. Encompassing the packed chamber with theatrical gesture. Commissioner, we face a public safety emergency requiring immediate intervention. Mr. Bradford deliberately blocks essential community infrastructure, serving 80 families who've relied on these facilities for 30 years. Her opening presentation lasted 6 minutes. Professional charts. Resident testimonials. Legal arguments about adverse possession and community precedent. She was confident, prepared, convinced she'd win through superior legal knowledge and community support. Then it was my turn. Commissioner, I said, rising with the measured calm that came from having absolute truth on my side. The evidence is straightforward. I own this land according to county records dating back to 1975. They built community facilities without permission, without easements, without compensation. Mike Anderson approached with engineering authority. Commissioner, my survey documented $750,000 in unpermitted construction. He activated the overhead projector. Gasps erupted as visual evidence showed property lines versus infrastructure placement. 3rd minute. Commissioner, I now hold the HOA's outstanding debt obligations. As primary creditor, I have legal authority to demand immediate payment or seize assets to recover $45,000. 4th minute. EPA representative presented photographs of environmental damage. Federal violations require immediate facility shutdown pending compliance review. 5th minute. Forensic accounting records. Commissioner, Miss Morrison has been operating illegal facilities on stolen land using stolen money. Claire's face cycled through emotions faster than she could process. Confidence to confusion to recognition to collapse. Her attorneys engaged in frantic whispered consultation. 6th minute. Commissioner, I don't want to destroy this community, but they need to understand you cannot build success on someone else's property with someone else's money. The chamber fell silent. 30 years of assumptions crumbling. Claire sat motionless, staring at evidence of her own fraud displayed on screens for everyone to see. Commissioner Huang's rulings followed with bureaucratic precision. HOA operations suspended immediately. All infrastructure deemed illegal. Criminal referral issued for Claire Morrison. $75,000 county fine. Michael Bradford granted exclusive property rights. County officials escorted Claire from the building. Her confident stride vanished. Her 3 attorneys whispered among themselves with obvious concern. The woman who'd terrorized me for months now faced complete destruction through the same legal system she'd manipulated. But here's what nobody tells you about winning. About being right. About exposing fraud and achieving justice. It doesn't feel as good as you think it will, because Claire's collapse meant chaos for 80 families who'd done nothing wrong. Her criminal investigation launched. Legal practice suspended. House listed with desperation pricing. But her personal destruction didn't undo the financial panic for residents who discovered their homes sat on illegal infrastructure. Property values dropped 15% immediately. Families faced potential liability for cleanup costs. Retirement security threatened. Children's college funds at risk. All because Claire had been stealing and I'd exposed her. Mrs. Patterson approached me outside the hearing. Her elderly face etched with worry and confusion. Mr. Bradford. We had no idea Claire was stealing. What happens to us now? I wanted to say everything would be fine. That justice meant everyone would be made whole. That truth always led to happy endings. But I'd learned truth was more complicated. Justice was messier. Winning meant something different than I'd expected when this started. 6 months later, I stood in my garage reviewing architectural plans for community infrastructure improvements. Legal resolution had come through comprehensive negotiation. Formal land lease agreement providing $2,000 monthly compensation. Financial restructuring spreading debt over 8 years. Environmental cleanup completed using funds reclaimed from Claire's embezzlement. Claire's complete downfall served as warning. 3 years probation. $50,000 in restitution. Permanent law license revocation. Civil judgment forcing bankruptcy. She'd moved out of state seeking anonymity after community support disappeared. But some things didn't get fixed with legal settlements and financial restructuring. Mrs. Patterson still flinched when official-looking documents arrived in her mail. Tom Bradley had resigned from the new board entirely. His confidence in community governance permanently broken. Young families who'd loved their neighborhood now checked title insurance obsessively and distrusted any authority figure. Property values recovered eventually. Actually increased 20% after legal foundations stabilized. Professional management restored confidence. Monthly financial reports replaced secrecy. But neighborhood barbecues felt different now. Quieter. More careful. People smiled and waved, but kept conversations surface level. Nobody wanted to talk about the year Claire Morrison had terrorized them while stealing from them while building their community on someone else's land. My morning walks through the neighborhood I partly owned provided opportunities to observe improvements and interact with residents who'd moved from fear to respect. But I noticed how some people still crossed the street. How some parents still steered children past my property a little faster than necessary, not because they feared me, but because I represented something uncomfortable. A reminder that 30 years of assumptions had been built on fraud. That their trusted leader had been a criminal, that their peaceful community had been constructed on systematic lies. I'd wanted justice. I'd achieved it. Claire faced consequences. The community got legal infrastructure. I received compensation for decades of trespass. But justice isn't the same as restoration. Truth doesn't erase trauma. Winning doesn't undo damage. Some nights, I still wondered if I'd made the right choice. If exposing Claire had been worth the collateral damage to innocent families, if my pursuit of property rights had been worth the permanent scar it left on community trust, the answer wasn't clear. Probably never would be, because sometimes being right just means you're the one left standing when everything burns down, and standing alone in the ashes, wondering if the fire was worth it, even when you didn't start it. Doesn't feel like victory. It just feels like survival. And sometimes that's all justice really is. The playground sits empty most evenings now. County tape long gone, but ghost of occupation remaining. Children play there, but their parents watch differently, more careful, more aware that things aren't always what they seem. I walk past it during evening strolls and remember Claire's confident smile that first Saturday morning. Remember her perfect hair and practiced authority and absolute certainty she could intimidate me into compliance. Remember the moment in that hearing room when certainty crumbled and she understood everything she'd built was collapsing. When her face cycled through emotions too fast to process, I don't feel satisfaction remembering that moment. Just exhausted recognition that truth required destruction before reconstruction could begin. People ask how 6 minutes changed everything. Truth is, it took 20 years of professional experience to recognize violations, 3 months of strategic planning to gather evidence, and a lifetime commitment to doing things right even when right felt complicated. Justice isn't revenge, but it isn't restoration either. It's just truth with consequences. And sometimes those consequences hurt everyone involved, including the person who insisted on truth in the first place. That's the thing about standing on principle. The ground you stand on doesn't get any softer just because you're right. It just means you're still standing when everything else falls down. And sometimes standing alone is all winning really means.